Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, August 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2026 Senate elections based off polling data in every single state. What we're taking a look is a 2026 map that is going to be based on the data that has been presented to us, that we've discussed, I think, in every single state that we've seen polling out of, barring a few exceptions. There are some states that I've seen the data. I've compiled it all here on my end that we haven't really discussed as much, but these are states that have polls for a variety of different reasons. Maybe the incumbent wanted one, but the race in itself isn't really a mainstream focus. But a lot of these states that we have discussed, we've talked about all individually, and I thought it would be really helpful to take a look at it visually, at least on a map, at least as it stands in about, late August of the year before the election. And we'll probably do these once a month. I'm thinking that as we get closer to the cycle, there will be more and more data. The context is that going right into this video, there are unfortunately quite a few states that do not have any polling data. For most of them, it's because they are safe states. States like Idaho and Arkansas and Alabama have no polling data for the cycle. But the unfortunate reality is that some of these states that I think there would be a benefit of having some data, states like Colorado and New Mexico, likewise, do not have any fielded polls out there. So for a lot of these, because there is not clear-cut data points for 100% of the states, we'll rely on the previous election cycle and just standard conventional wisdom around the states and their electoral history for pretty much mapping this map altogether. But I am excited to actually take a look at some of these states that do have data points and do have, quite a few polls for us to assess and analyze, and we can talk about them on a more individual basis because some of these states actually do largely depend on who the respective party nominees are going to be in terms of how competitive they are. So focusing in on our map here, let's start off on the West Coast and move our way over to the better coast, the East Coast. So we'll start off with the state of Oregon. There's no data out of this state, but also no indication that this state is going to be competitive. Not really one that I think is worth, fielding the data points because it's not a competitive race. Obviously, it'd be nice if that existed, but polling is quite expensive in this day and age, and, chances are nobody wants to take that. The state of Idaho, likewise, no data out of the state. Safe Republican state. Montana is the same. The interesting thing that I'll briefly pause on Montana is that it is always quite disappointing that in states that were competitive 6 years ago, like Montana, which had a plethora of different data points for us to look at, have none. This cycle, I get it, we're a year out. No one's really talking about Montana that much, but it certainly stands to be quite an interesting state. It has had a Democratic senator as recently as 2025, actually this year. John Tester just left office, and it's one that was a 10-point margin in 2020. So probably a bit disappointing for Democrats that this time it's not competitive, but again, they move. Also, things can change practically overnight in American politics. Wyoming, that's a state that Democrats never really have a chance in. Donald Trump, won that state by about 50 points. Not really a shot that that's going to be a close race. South Dakota, likewise. Nebraska will jump over. There's data out of that state. Not great for the Republican Party. The state of Oklahoma, pretty solid and locked in for the GOP. Kansas, likewise to Montana, somewhat competitive. The last time Barbara Bollier outperformed Joe Biden in 2020 by about a few percentage points in the state. A lot of money invested in it. Didn't end up being that competitive, but more competitive than it's expected to be this cycle. Kansas is a safe Republican state. Arkansas, like I said, safe for the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party. Looking over, believe it or not, actually, the last time Arkansas had a Democrat who won an election, statewide Senate race, 2008, ran unopposed. This state was blue through and through in that Senate race, and 6 years later, that incumbent ended up losing when Republicans wouldn't even contest them in 2008. So fascinating trajectory for Arkansas, moving towards the right. The state of Louisiana, safe for the GOP, not much hope there for Democrats. Some conversation about a speculative John Bel Edwards campaign for governor. Doesn't look like he'd go for Senate. Mississippi safe for the Republican Party. Again, one of those states that's sort of a sleeper. In 2020 was a 10-point margin. Very close given the circumstances of the national environment and the fact that Mississippi is a very red state. Alabama also, that was a state that had a Democratic incumbent running for re-election in 2020. He lost. Doug Jones, who beat Roy Moore in 2017. Just giving you a bit of historical context. Florida, believe it or not, has no data points out of the state. I'm not going to call it safe because Donald Trump didn't win it by more than 15 points, but no data points out of the state, which I find to be quite surprising. Normally, Florida is one of the first states that gets polled in the cycle. Obviously, different circumstances. Florida is a very red state now, but, for me, I thought that was a bit surprising. Tennessee, safe for the GOP. Likewise, South Carolina, safe for the Republicans. Kentucky, West Virginia, which had a Democratic senator as recently as 2025. safe for the Republicans. Obviously, no chance there the Democrats get close. And some of the other states that don't have, polls right now, we can take a look. The state of Illinois does not have any data for this cycle. Democrats are in a safe position there. The state of New Jersey, believe it or not, as competitive as it was last presidential, 5.6% margin or 5.9% margin for Kamala Harris, no data points. Cory Booker is the incumbent there, though. He'll probably win by a very solid amount. In the state of Delaware, we're going to have to consider that one to be safe for the Democratic Party. Likewise, no data out of the state. Massachusetts has some data, so we'll hold on there. Rhode Island, no data as well. That fills out the map here, but we're left with, a pretty substantive amount. Like I said in the very beginning, though, what was disappointing was to see that Colorado and New Mexico did not have data. And I think these are two states that in the last Senate cycle, 9-point margin, 6-point margin, deserve some attention. I don't imagine that, these races will be the most competitive, but I do think that Democrats and Republicans would benefit by having some data in the state. Kamala Harris won the state of New Mexico by about 6. She won the state of Colorado by about 11. So not the safest states for the Democrats, but not really that risky either. For now, we're going to consider them both to be likely for the Democratic Party. So that leaves us with about 14 states, a lot of states that we've talked about before, a lot of them that we've done in-depth analysis on some of these different polls, but a lot of them as well we haven't talked about. So I'm really interested to see that, first of all, not many of these remaining states are considered to be, super locked in. I forgot to characterize, not 14 states, 13 states. We're talking about Florida here, moving that one over. And just to get it out of the way, I guess to really hone in on some of the states that are a bit more important just in terms of electoral dynamics and investments from the National Party. Massachusetts does have data. Believe it or not, it's safe for the Democratic Party, a 20-point margin for Ed Markey, who's looking like he's going to run for re-election in the state of Massachusetts. But again, getting back to this point, 12 remaining races, anywhere from Maine all the way to Alaska. I mean, we are literally talking about coast to coast here, and continental United States to, non-continental. Point is, 42 states right now safe for the Democratic Party, Republicans at 46. So already at baseline, the GOP does have that upper hand that we sort of knew they had going into this cycle. The 2026 elections have never really been for Democrats about how they can win the Senate majority, but rather how they can set it up for victory in the future. But Republicans arguably do quite well in some of these races that Democrats are undoubtedly going to be investing a lot of money in. States like Ohio, states like Iowa, where Democrats think they have an opportunity, they may, but it doesn't look likely, at least not the most practical and obvious answer to the 2026 midterm elections. I want to start out by characterizing some of the states that are more on the solid end for the party that is expected to win them. So these are likely states. We're done with the safe states. No more safe states. We have likely states, meaning these are states that are decided between 5 to 15 points. So pretty substantive margins, but not outside the realm of possibility that if a candidate collapses, you have a Mark Robinson type of situation. Look at the 2024 North Carolina governor's race if you don't get the reference. But the point is that barring something like that, these party members are likely to win these states. One notable exception, though, to that, and we will get to that in just a moment. We'll start off by saying that the state of Virginia right now, what does the data tell us? That Democrats are likely to win it by about 10 points. Doesn't really change much. The 2024 election, Kamala Harris won the state by about 6. So I'm not really surprised that Democrats are, expected to win Virginia in a bluer year by more with an incumbent, because that's generally how it is, and I don't really expect it to be that close. And that actually was data against Glenn Youngkin, the incumbent Republican governor, who is quite popular in the state. So if Democrats are polling that well against the Republican incumbent governor, chances are they're polling much better in future polls that would come out about other Republican contenders. The next state that is likely for the Democratic Party is the state of New Hampshire. The last data points were actually done with the incumbent senator who's not running, but still Chris Pappas is likely just to fill that role and do nearly just as well. Not really many viable contenders on the Republican side. Scott Brown, who had been senator from Massachusetts, is now running to be senator of New Hampshire. Clear-cut carpetbagging, wasn't able to win New Hampshire in 2014. Nothing says that it will be able to win in 2026. Reminder, 2014 was the year Republicans gained nearly 10 seats in the Senate. They got the highest Republican majority in the 21st century they've seen, and yet New Hampshire, as a state that Hillary Clinton would only go on to win by less than a point, wouldn't even budge because he was running as the senator from Massachusetts, running to be senator of New Hampshire. Made no sense, and it doesn't make sense now. New Hampshire, likely for the Democratic Party, makes a lot of sense. I was talking a bit about why, the Democrats or Republicans who are in this likely range are going to win, practically barring a massive collapse of their party. I think for this one state in particular, where the data might not be as correct, or it is correct, but it might not be as indicative of what the eventual vote share would be like, should be exempted from that conversation. And that's the state of North Carolina, where right now Roy Cooper, as the Democratic former governor, popular, well-known, high name ID, is polling quite well against Michael Whatley. But that's largely because, again, Cooper has higher name ID, and by the time we reach the election, no doubt in my mind, this race is down to a single digit, down to a close single digit, 1 or 2 or 3 points. Roy Cooper, I think, has the upper hand. I think most Democrats and Republicans probably agree on that. But North Carolina right now, the polling is suggesting Roy Cooper has a very strong lead, which means there's, support to be lost, and you can still win the election. Good place to be at a starting point, not necessarily as realistic as a likely characterization might be for New Hampshire or Virginia, or as indicative of the eventual margin. But who knows? North Carolina is very dynamic, and sometimes these things happen. So that brings the Democrats to 45 seats, still 1 seat short of where the Republicans are. But Republicans don't have any likely states remaining or any safe states remaining, believe it or not. All of the remaining states are going to be characterized by lean margins. But it is Republicans who do start to have that upper hand. They start off with lean margins in states like Texas, which might shock you. But the reason for that is because against John Cornyn or against Ken Paxton, these Democrats are actually polling quite well. Much better against Ken Paxton than they are against John Cornyn, but that is to be expected. The problem for the GOP is that Ken Paxton right now stands to be in a strong position, could very well win the nomination in the state of Texas despite everything that has been thrown against him. Has a higher approval rating than John Cornyn, is liked more than John Cornyn just from an electoral dynamic, but he is significantly less electable in the general election. So what this is competing with is that some of the data says that against John Cornyn, Democrats lose by 6, which is already a significant underperformance of Donald Trump's 14-point margin in 2024. But again, very different national environment, and a lot of voters that shifted towards Trump in 2024 might not be as all in on the GOP in 2026. But against Ken Paxton, sometimes these leads are reduced to just 1 or 2 points for the GOP, and the most recent Dem internal said that Colin Allred actually had an advantage over Paxton, which again, I don't trust as to say that, Democrats are going to be the favorites. But it is noteworthy that even a Dem internal, which again leans towards Democrats, still was able to find a lead in a state that has been as difficult for Democrats as Texas. And while I do think that Republicans still stand to be the favorites today, I mean, it is difficult to see a reality in which Democrats win Texas, as a state that hasn't gone for them in quite a long time. It is simultaneously Ken Paxton who would be the only Republican who could lose it, and it'd be interesting to see. Moving past Texas, though, I think we're spending too much time talking about it. The next state that might surprise you, too, in terms of how close it is the state of Alaska, where the signs are turning, and it looks like Mary Peltola, the former congresswoman, first Democrat to win that seat in over 50 years, might run statewide again, not for governor, not for House, but for Senate. Chuck Schumer's been courting her, really trying to get her to run for Senate in 2026. And Tom Begich, who is the uncle of the incumbent U.S. Representative Republican, this is a Democrat, Tom Begich, said that he would only run for governor if Mary Peltola was not running for governor. And guess what? Recently announced that he was running for governor, the odds are turning more that Mary Peltola will run for Senate. The data there suggests it would be a hyper-competitive race. The state of Nebraska, another state you might be shocked to see in the lean characterization, but that is because Dan Osborne, the independent who ran in 2024, keep in mind, Nebraska is a very red state. Donald Trump won it by 21 points, but in the Senate race, Deb Fischer only won by 6 points in the state of Nebraska. Why did that happen? Dan Osborne ran as an independent with the blessing of the Democratic Party and did very, very well. What Nebraska does is narrows down a race, but regardless puts Republicans just 1 seat away from the Senate majority. So let's pivot and talk about some of the states the Democrats would be in a good position on. Minnesota, I am so sorry. This is a state that really jumped out to me that I should have talked about before. Does not have any data, unfortunately, because that is such a bad Republican frontrunner. They have Royce White, who might be the nominee again. I don't know why I kept off on Minnesota for so long. I am really sorry, realizing that, all the way towards the end, Minnesota is safe for the Democratic Party. But even then, Democrats are still 3 seats behind. And again, we're talking about some of the states that Democrats have the advantage in, but we know Republicans have the upper hand and maintained it across these Senate elections for quite some time. The 2 states that Democrats have so far, the first one is Georgia, which really shouldn't shock you. Jon Ossoff is running against a bunch of lackluster Republicans, and he's a stellar candidate with a good track record and who will likely do well in the state of Georgia, especially given that Donald Trump only won the state by 2 points. And even then, 2 Democratic senators who have routinely won back-to-back elections and will likely win this one. Georgia makes sense. Michigan is another state the Democrats have the upper hand in. It is narrow, and it only right now is with Haley Stevens in the polling. That's just what the data says. Whether or not that is reality and whether or not she wins the nomination is a second question. But the data says that just clear cut, Haley Stevens is the front runner in the general election. Haley Stevens is the only one who wins. That's just it. It's a narrow race. It's not great for Democrats. None of the candidates seem to be really excelling in the general election data. But again, who knows what could happen? The primary is a while away, and it doesn't look like that frontrunner status is as solid and locked in as it might be in other states. 24% is not phenomenal, but it is better than if the other candidates are at 11 or 12. 24% obviously is putting you in the lead. But in terms of general election viability, I think a lot has yet to be seen. But so far, lean for the Democratic Party. That leaves us with Iowa, Ohio, and Maine. I'll start off with Iowa and Ohio, two states where the data does tell us that these states are going to be close. This is, again, with a hypothetical Joni Ernst against a quote-unquote generic Democrat. So that is, insert the blank of what you think a Democrat is. Would you vote for that person? Democrats don't lose that battle by a massive amount, probably about 3 to 4 points. Not great for Joni Ernst, but not amazing for Democrats either. They aren't the favorites, and Iowa is a state that is continuously out of reach. But Joni Ernst doesn't have a great track record either. In 2020, she only won this state by about 6, when Trump won it by 8, and then in the next election cycle by about 13. So keeping that in mind, she's not phenomenal for the Republicans, but she's not going to lose, at least not right now. The state of Ohio is likewise a lean Republican state. The data says that on average, because the most recent Emerson poll says it's a likely state, but we have other data from beforehand from one of the state universities, that Ohio is a state that right now is hovering around a 4.5% margin, which is right on the cusp of being a likely state for the GOP, but that's against Sherrod Brown, who's a very strong Democrat, but at the end of the day, Ohio is a red state, and it has become continuously difficult for Democrats to win. And so looking at Ohio right now, I would say lean for the GOP. That is a fair characterization, I think, based on what the data is saying. Puts Republicans at that magic number of 51 that, obviously they have the presidency, but it makes it difficult for Democrats to see a pathway to the future in 2028 if Republicans get any more seats than 51. Because in 2028, the real pickup opportunities are pretty much contained to Wisconsin and North Carolina, barring a massive shift in some other states. And that, at that point, would give Democrats the majority. Right now, Democrats would be counting on winning in the state of Maine. But the unfortunate reality is that the only poll out here, because we don't have many polls from Maine right now, shocking compared to 2020, is a Jordan Wood internal. Now, if you don't know Jordan Wood, he's one of the few Democrats who has announced that they are running for Senate in Maine. He was former chief of staff to Katie Porter, California representative, now running in the state of Maine in 2026. He released an internal from all the way back in March recently, and I think there's a reason why the internal never really made it to the press, and that's because the internal said that he was down, and it said that Susan Collins was up. And that was a Dem internal that skewed towards the left. And Susan Collins, who has had a history of outpacing polling data, that's a great place for her to be in. Puts her in a really strong position. Democrats are looking for their energy and for their engagement and excitement in Maine Senate race. I don't know if it will come. Because right now, they have Graham Plattner, who stands to be probably the most formidable candidate in the general election today, right now. But that doesn't mean that they are the favorites at all. This race has become very difficult for Democrats to navigate and find a candidate who can clearly win. Because even if it is Governor Janet Mills, there's no guarantee that that is an immediate victory. Maine is pesky. And that's because Susan Collins, for as much as she is unpopular today, has a huge electoral history, one that many Democrats just simply did not want to contest. Not Jared Golden, not Shelley Pingree, and maybe not even Janet Mills. But what it does here is put the Republicans at 52 seats, the Democrats at 48. Democrats do well in North Carolina, Georgia. They do okay in Michigan. They lose the state of Maine, which would be necessary for Democrats in their long pathway to reclaiming the Senate majority by the end of the decade. It may happen, it may not happen, but as of right now, what the polling data says is Republicans are weaker in some states than they should be, but ultimately still win the 6-year terms anyway, which makes it inconsequential for the overall brand of the numbers here for Democrats and Republicans. Final map here, 52 to 48 as of today, based on all the polling in all 50 states. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.